It was a quiet night at City Hospital. The clock showed 2:45 a.m. Dr. James Smith walked down the empty hallway. His footsteps made soft sounds on the shiny floor. The lights above buzzed softly. Dr. Smith looked like a normal doctor in his clean white coat, with gray hair and simple glasses. Anyone who saw him would think he was just checking on his patients, like doctors do every night. But Dr. Smith had a dark secret. In room 205 lay Mary Jones, a kind woman who had 3 children. She came to the hospital 2 days ago for a simple operation. She was getting better, but Dr. Smith had other plans for her. He touched a small bottle in his pocket. He had made sure the security cameras on this floor weren't working. His friend Bob, who fixed things at the hospital, had helped him with that. No one knew that Dr. Smith was hiding something terrible. Mary would be the 8th patient he had killed this year. He was very careful about it. When his patients died, everyone thought it was just bad luck. He had been doing this for 3 years, and no one had caught him. Just as he was about to enter Mary's room, a young nurse named Linda Brown appeared. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her work time had ended an hour ago. Dr. Smith stopped at the door. Linda worried him. She asked too many questions. She wrote things down in her small notebook all the time. Lately, she had been looking at his old patient files with strange eyes. "Dr. Smith," Linda called out in the quiet hallway. "Why are you here so late?" She was holding many patient files, and he could see his name on them. His heart beat faster, but he kept his face calm. He was good at hiding his feelings. "Just checking on Mrs. Jones," he said with a fake smile. "She's not feeling very well." He watched Linda write something in her little notebook, the one she carried everywhere these days. What Dr. Smith didn't know was that outside the hospital, Police Officer Tom White sat in his car, watching. He had been following deaths at 3 different hospitals. He had been looking for answers for 15 months. His search had brought him here to City Hospital tonight. But even Officer Tom didn't know how close he was to finding one of the worst killer doctors ever. It started to rain. Thunder boomed outside. Dr. Smith made a new plan. Mary Jones might live tonight, but Linda Brown had become dangerous. She knew too much. He had to do something about Linda first. He smiled at her and said nice things about how hard she worked. As he walked away, he thought about the medicine room where Linda always went before going home. It would be easy to make something bad happen there. After all, accidents happened in hospitals all the time. But Dr. Smith didn't know that Linda's little notebook held a very important clue. It was something so small that even Linda didn't know how important it was, and everything would change in the next day. The rain got harder outside. Dr. Smith walked to his office thinking he had everything under control, but 3 more people would die before anyone caught him. One would be someone no one expected, another would be someone who knew his biggest secret. And the third would change everything. In the parking lot, Officer Tom's phone rang. The call would give him the first real clue about Dr. Smith. Meanwhile, in the hospital basement, the old cleaner, Joe, was finding something in the trash that would shock everyone. And in her apartment across town, Dr. Smith's ex-wife, Sarah, was finally opening a box she had kept locked for 10 years. Inside was something that would explain why Dr. Smith started killing. The night was just beginning. Dr. Smith thought he was the smartest person in the hospital, but he didn't know that his careful plans were about to fall apart, piece by piece, in ways that nobody could have guessed. Joe the cleaner didn't like going through trash, but something shiny caught his eye. In a bin behind the medicine room, he found an empty glass bottle. He almost threw it away, but then he saw something strange. The label had been scraped off very carefully. In his 20 years of cleaning City Hospital, he had never seen that before. Meanwhile, Linda Brown sat at the nurse's desk, her hands shaking as she wrote in her notebook. She wasn't just writing about Dr. Smith anymore. She was drawing a map. Every patient who died unexpectedly in the last 3 years had been in different rooms. But when she connected the room numbers on her map, they made a pattern. She didn't understand what it meant yet, but it gave her chills. The rain kept falling outside. Officer Tom answered his phone in the dark car. "You need to check the night shift schedules," said a woman's voice. It was Betty, an old nurse who had retired last year. Every death happened on nights when Martha wasn't working at the front desk. Dr. Smith always made sure Martha had those nights off. Before Tom could ask more questions, Betty hung up. She was scared of something, or someone. Up in his office, Dr. Smith opened his computer. His hands moved quickly over the keyboard as he changed tomorrow's work schedule. He needed Linda to work the night shift in the quiet wing of the hospital. Nobody went there after midnight. It would be perfect. But as he typed, he didn't notice the small red light blinking on his office camera. The IT guy, Pete, had fixed those cameras last week, without telling Bob, the maintenance man who worked for Dr. Smith. Across town, Sarah Smith's hands trembled as she opened the old box. Inside was a diary. Not hers, but her dead sister's. 10 years ago, her sister had been a patient at City Hospital. Everyone said she died from her illness. But the last entry in her diary said something different. "James isn't trying to save me. I saw him change my medicine when he thought I was sleeping." Back at the hospital, Joe the cleaner took the strange bottle home. His daughter Jenny was studying to be a doctor. Maybe she could tell him why someone would scrape off a medicine label. He didn't know that this bottle would later save someone's life and end another's. Linda looked at her watch. It was 3:30 a.m. She needed to check the medicine room one last time before leaving. As she walked down the dark hallway, she heard footsteps behind her. But when she turned around, nobody was there. She didn't know that Dr. Smith was watching her from around the corner, waiting for the right moment. Officer Tom started his car. Betty's phone call had given him an idea. But as he reached for his coffee cup, he knocked over a pile of papers. Hospital staff records scattered across the seat. In the dim light, something caught his eye. Dr. Smith's time cards showed he was working at 2 different hospitals at the same time, on the days when patients died. Suddenly, the hospital's quiet was broken by an alarm. Someone had opened the back door, the one that was supposed to be locked all night. Dr. Smith froze. This wasn't part of his plan. Down in the medicine room, Linda heard the alarm too. She quickly took a photo of something she had just found hidden behind the medicine boxes. And in the parking lot, a car pulled in. Inside was someone both Dr. Smith and Officer Tom knew very well. Someone everyone thought had died 3 years ago in another hospital. As the car's headlights swept across the building, 4 people in different parts of the hospital made decisions that would change everything. Linda decided to stay a little longer. Joe decided to come back to return the bottle. Officer Tom decided to go inside instead of waiting. And Dr. Smith decided that tonight, more than one person would have to die. No one knew that in less than an hour, the hospital's power would go out. And in the darkness, secrets that had been buried for years would finally come to light. The old hospital building stood quiet in the rain, holding its dark secrets. But by sunrise, nothing would be the same. And the person who would finally stop Dr. Smith wasn't even at the hospital yet. The car's headlights turned off in the parking lot. A woman stepped out, her face hidden under an umbrella. Her name was Rachel Green. Dr. Smith's first patient who everyone thought had died 3 years ago. She had been hiding all this time, gathering proof. Tonight, She had finally come back. Inside the medicine room, Linda's phone flashed as she took more pictures. Behind the medicine boxes, she found something that made her gasp. A small notebook with dates and room numbers. The handwriting wasn't Dr. Smith's. Someone else was helping him. But who? The power went out suddenly. The hospital became dark and quiet. Only the emergency lights glowed dimly in the hallways. In his office, Dr. Smith smiled. He had planned this power cut, or so he thought. But this time, Bob, the maintenance man, hadn't caused it. Someone else had cut the power. Officer Tom walked through the hospital's front door, his flashlight making long shadows on the walls. At the front desk, he found old Martha, the nurse, who was supposed to be off duty tonight. She looked scared. "I had to come in," she whispered. "I found this in my mailbox today." She handed him a photo. It showed her helping Dr. Smith with something in a patient's room 3 years ago. Under the photo was a note. "I know what you did." Joe the cleaner was walking back to return the strange bottle when he heard footsteps. He hid behind a large plant and saw Bob the maintenance man running down the stairs. Bob was carrying a box full of medicine bottles, all with their labels scraped off. Joe quietly followed him. In the dark hallway, Linda heard someone coming. She quickly hid the notebook in her pocket and pretended to check medicines. Dr. Smith appeared in the doorway. "Working late again, Linda?" he asked with a friendly smile, but his eyes looked cold. He walked into the room and closed the door behind him. Rachel Green walked through the hospital halls like a ghost. She knew every turn, every room. She had spent months here as a patient, watching Dr. Smith, learning his secrets. She thought she knew everything about him, but she was wrong. What she would find tonight would change everything she thought she knew. Back in his car, Officer Tom looked at the photo Martha had given him. In the background, barely visible, was a painting on the wall. He remembered seeing that painting somewhere else, in the newspaper. It had been sold at an auction last year for millions of dollars. The money had gone to a children's hospital where Dr. Smith worked part-time. Tom's hands shook as he realized what this meant. Suddenly, Joe the cleaner saw something that made him stop following Bob. Through a basement window, he saw his daughter, Jenny, the medical student, walking into the hospital. She wasn't supposed to be here, not tonight. Not when he had finally figured out what the strange bottles meant. In the medicine room, Linda felt her heart beating fast. Dr. Smith was standing between her and the door. "You know," he said quietly, "curiosity can be very dangerous." He took something out of his pocket, but before he could do anything, the door opened. A security guard stood there, a new one Linda had never seen before. "Dr. Smith," the guard said, "there's an emergency in room 205. Mary Jones isn't breathing." Dr. Smith had to leave, but as he walked out, he didn't notice Linda's hand touching her pocket where the notebook was hidden. She didn't know that this notebook would soon disappear and turn up in the last place anyone would think to look. The hospital's emergency lights flickered in different parts of the building. 6 people were moving in the darkness, each carrying a piece of the truth. Rachel with her proof, Linda with the notebook, Joe with the strange bottle, Jenny with a secret she had just learned, Martha with more photos, and Bob with his box of bottles. But the biggest surprise was still coming, because Dr. Smith wasn't working alone. His helper was someone they all knew and trusted. And that person was watching everything right now through the hospital's security cameras, which weren't really broken at all. Outside, the storm got worse. Thunder crashed as Officer Tom made a call that would bring more police to the hospital. But would they arrive in time? Because in room 205, Mary Jones wasn't the only one in danger anymore, and the person in the security room had just turned off all the emergency lights. Complete darkness fell over City Hospital, and in that darkness, someone was about to tell the truth that would connect all 30 victims to one terrible plan. In the pitch-black hospital, Jenny walked carefully through the basement. Her phone's light showed the way. She wasn't here by accident. Her father, Joe, didn't know that she had been working as a night lab assistant for the past month. She had seen things. Strange things that didn't make sense until today. Upstairs, in room 205, Dr. Smith bent over Mary Jones. She wasn't really having trouble breathing. The security guard who called him, the one Linda didn't recognize, was Dr. Smith's old friend from medical school, Dave Wilson. But Dave had his own plans tonight. "Everything's ready in the basement," he whispered to Dr. Smith. "But we have a problem. Rachel Green is here." Dr. Smith's face went white. "That's impossible. She's dead." But even as he said it, he remembered that they never found her body 3 years ago. She had disappeared from her hospital room one night, leaving behind only a note that said, "I know." Meanwhile, Linda was trapped in the dark medicine room. The door wouldn't open. Someone had locked it from outside. As she banged on the door, her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Check the ceiling." She pointed her phone light up and saw something that made her heart stop. Dozens of small cameras hidden in the air vents. Someone had been watching the medicine room all along. Joe followed Bob to the basement, still holding the strange bottle. He heard voices and carefully looked around a corner. In the dim emergency light, he saw Bob talking to someone in a doctor's coat. But it wasn't Dr. Smith. It was Dr. Sarah Carter, the hospital's head of medicine. "The bottles are ready," Bob said, "but Smith doesn't know about the extra ingredient you added." Officer Tom ran through the rain to the hospital's back entrance. Martha's photo had made him realize something huge. The children's hospital, where the painting money went, was connected to all 30 victims. Each patient who died had children who were treated there. But why? Rachel Green moved silently through the hospital halls she knew so well. She carried a small USB drive in her pocket that contained security footage from 3 years ago, footage that showed who really helped her escape, the night everyone thought she died. As she turned a corner, she came face to face with Jenny. Both women froze. "You're supposed to be dead," Jenny whispered. "So are you," Rachel answered. They stared at each other, realizing they were both supposed to be victims of Dr. Smith. But before they could talk more, they heard footsteps coming from both directions. They were trapped. In the security room, the person watching the cameras smiled. Every player was almost in position. On one screen, Dr. Smith and Dave headed to the basement. On another, Linda discovered a way out of the medicine room. Through an old air vent, Joe and Bob were arguing near the lab, and Dr. Carter was making a phone call. Officer Tom was almost at the back door. Suddenly, all the screens went dark. A new message flashed across them. "I have proof about the real killer. Meet in the old operating room. All of you." It was signed M. Nobody knew that M was Martha, the front desk nurse. She had been collecting evidence for years, playing the role of a scared witness. Tonight, she would reveal that Dr. Smith wasn't the real mastermind. He was just another piece in someone else's bigger plan. The old operating room was on the 4th floor. One by one, they all got the message. As they moved through the dark hospital toward that room, each person thought they knew the whole truth. But they were all wrong, because the real killer wasn't Dr. Smith, or Dr. Carter, or even Dave. The hospital's biggest secret was hidden in plain sight, in a place they walked past every day, and it had something to do with the children's hospital, the strange bottles, and a patient from 15 years ago who never existed. Thunder crashed again as Officer Tom finally reached the back door. It was locked, But through the window, he saw something that changed everything he thought he knew about the case. In the parking lot next to Rachel's car was an ambulance. Its back doors were open, and inside were dozens of boxes labeled City Children's Hospital. The pieces were starting to fit together. But in the old operating room upstairs, someone was about to walk into a trap, because M wasn't Martha at all. One by one, they climbed the dark stairs to the 4th floor. Linda crawled out of the air vent, covered in dust but clutching the notebook tightly. Jenny and Rachel found a service elevator that still worked with the emergency power. Joe followed the sound of footsteps, still holding his strange bottle. Dr. Smith and Dave took the back stairs, whispering about Rachel. Officer Tom finally broke through the back door and ran inside. But Dr. Carter wasn't heading to the old operating room. Instead, she went to her office and opened a safe hidden behind a painting. Inside was a thick file marked Project Hope. As she read it, her hands started shaking. "All this time," she whispered, "we were wrong about everything." In the old operating room, Martha wasn't there. Instead, they found a laptop sitting on a rusty operating table. Its screen glowed in the darkness, showing a video. In it, a young doctor was talking to a camera. The date showed 15 years ago, and everyone gasped when they saw his face. It was Dr. Smith, looking much younger. "If you're watching this," young Dr. Smith said in the video, "it means someone finally found out the truth about Project Hope. The Children's Hospital isn't what everyone thinks. The money, the dead patients, it's all connected to what happened to my sister." Suddenly, the video stopped. The laptop screen changed to show live security camera feeds from all over the hospital. On one screen, they saw Dr. Carter running towards them with the Project Hope file. On another, they saw Martha, the real Martha, tied up in a supply closet. She had been there all night. So who was the Martha that gave Officer Tom the photo? "It was me," said a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a woman step into the room. It was Sarah, Dr. Smith's ex-wife, wearing a nurse's uniform. She looked exactly like Martha in the dark. "I've been watching all of you," she said, "playing you against each other, making you think James was the killer." But before she could say more, Jenny stepped forward. "No," she said quietly. "You're not the real Sarah. I know because Sarah Smith died 10 years ago. I saw her death certificate in the hospital records." The fake Sarah smiled. "Smart girl. But you're only half right." She pulled off a wig, revealing her true face. Everyone in the room gasped. She looked exactly like Rachel Green. "Twins," Rachel said, stepping into the light. "Sarah was our sister, the one who died in this hospital 15 years ago. Or at least that's what the records say." Joe's hands gripped the strange bottle tighter as he finally understood. "The labels," he said, "they're not medicine bottles at all. They're proof." Just then, Dr. Carter burst into the room with the Project Hope file. "The Children's Hospital," she said, out of breath. "It's not treating sick children. It's been empty for years. The money from those paintings, it's all going somewhere else." On the laptop, security cameras showed Bob running away from the hospital with his box of bottles. But he didn't get far. Police cars were pulling into the parking lot, their lights flashing in the rain. Dr. Smith stood in the middle of the room, looking at his younger self, frozen on the laptop screen. "I didn't kill those patients," he said quietly. "I was trying to save them, because each one knew something about what really happened here 15 years ago." "No," said Dave, pulling out a gun. "You killed them because I told you to, just like you killed Sarah. Or thought you did." The lights suddenly came back on, bright and blinding. In the doorway stood another Sarah, the real one, very much alive. Behind her was little Martha, her teenage daughter, holding a phone, that controlled all the hospital's cameras and power. Project Hope wasn't about helping children, Sarah said. It was about making them disappear. And tonight, it's finally going to end. But no one noticed that Linda had quietly torn a page from the notebook and slipped it to Jenny. On it was a single line that would explain everything. Project Hope test subject number 1, Martha Smith, age 3. The truth about the 30 victims was about to come out, but the real shock wasn't who killed them. It was why they had to die, to protect a secret about a little girl who grew up to become someone in that very room. Little Martha stepped into the room, her phone still controlling the hospital systems. She looked at Dr. Smith, her father, with tears in her eyes. "I'm test subject number 1, she said. "The girl they tried to make disappear 15 years ago. My real name isn't Martha. It's Hope." The room went quiet. Dr. Smith stared at his daughter, the truth finally hitting him. All these years, he thought he was protecting her by following Dave's orders. He never knew she was the same little girl from Project Hope. Linda opened the notebook again, her hands trembling. "The 30 victims," she said, reading from the pages. "They were all nurses and doctors who worked here 15 years ago. Each one helped with Project Hope. They weren't just regular patients. They were witnesses." Joe held up the strange bottle, the glass shining under the bright lights. "These aren't medicine bottles," he explained. "They're sample bottles. Each one has DNA from a different child who went through Project Hope. Bob wasn't destroying evidence. He was collecting it." Sarah walked to her daughter and held her hand. "We faked my death to protect her," she said. "Project Hope was trying to create special children, children who could control things with their minds, like how Martha, Hope, can control the hospital's power and cameras, but something went wrong. The other children," she couldn't finish. "They didn't make it," Dave said, his gun still pointed at the group. "Except for Hope. She was perfect. And now she's going to help us start the project again. That's why the children's hospital is empty. It's ready for new subjects." Dr. Carter opened the Project Hope file. "The painting money wasn't just going to the children's hospital," she read. "It was paying for new labs, hidden underground. They're planning to take more children." Rachel and her twin, the fake Sarah, moved to stand beside Hope. "We were nurses back then," Rachel said. "We helped some of the children escape. That's why Dave wanted us dead. But we've been working against Project Hope ever since." Suddenly, Officer Tom's phone buzzed. "The police found Bob," he announced. "But the box of bottles is gone. Someone else has them." "I do," said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Jenny holding a familiar box. "I took them from Bob in the basement." "Because 15 years ago, I wasn't just Joe's daughter." She looked at Hope. "I was test subject number 2. Hope stared at Jenny in shock. The lights in the room flickered as her emotions swirled. "You survived too?" "Yes," Jenny said. "But I was hurt badly. They thought I lost my abilities. So they let me go, and Joe adopted me. He never knew the truth until tonight." Dave laughed, a cold sound that echoed in the room. "This is perfect," he said. "2 successful subjects. Now we can finally prove that Project Hope works." But he didn't see Dr. Smith moving slowly behind him. On the laptop screen, security footage showed police entering the hospital, getting closer to the old operating room. "There's something else," Hope said, her voice getting stronger. "Something in those bottles that nobody knows. The DNA samples. They're not just from the children." She looked at Dave. "They're from their real parents too. Parents who never knew their children were taken. Parents like... Before she could finish, the lights went out again. But this time, it wasn't Hope's doing. In the darkness, a gunshot rang out. When the lights came back on, everything had changed. Someone was on the floor, someone else was missing, and in Sarah's hand was a piece of paper that would lead them to hundreds of other children. Children who didn't die in Project Hope, but were hidden away, just like Hope and Jenny, growing up without knowing what they could really do. The storm outside had stopped, but inside the hospital, the real storm was just beginning. When the lights came back on, Dave was on the floor, but he wasn't shot. Dr. Smith stood over him with an empty syringe. "The same medicine you made me give the others," he said quietly. "But Dave isn't dead. I switched the real medicine with water months ago." The missing person was Linda, but they could hear her running down the hallway, her shoes making loud sounds on the floor. In her hand was Dave's gun, which she had grabbed in the darkness. "Linda, wait!" Jenny called out. "You don't understand. You're one of us." Everyone froze. Hope turned to Jenny. "What do you mean?" Jenny opened her bag and pulled out an old photo. It showed 3 little girls in hospital gowns, all about 3 years old. "Test subjects 1, 2, and 3, she said. "Hope, me, and Linda. But Linda was adopted by a doctor who took her far away. She doesn't remember any of it." Sarah unfolded the paper in her hand. It was a map of America with red dots all over it. "Each dot is a child from Project Hope," she explained. "After what happened to Hope and Jenny, they split up the children, sent them to different hospitals, different families. They've been watching them grow up, waiting to see which ones developed abilities." Officer Tom's radio crackled. "We found something in the basement," a voice said. "Hundreds of files. Each one has 2 names, the child's real name and their new name." Dr. Carter looked at her Project Hope file again. "That's what the 30 victims discovered," she said. "They found out the children weren't dead. They were trying to find them, to tell them the truth. That's why they had to be stopped." Joe picked up Dave's phone, which had fallen during the struggle. On it was a list of names, doctors and nurses at hospitals all over the country. "These people," he said, "they're all watching the children, like Dave watched Hope." Suddenly, Hope's phone made a strange sound. All the screens in the room, the laptop, phones, everything, showed the same message. "We remember." It was coming from somewhere in the hospital's computer system. "It's the others," Hope whispered. "The children like me and Jenny, they're waking up. They're remembering." Rachel and her twin rushed to the laptop. Security cameras showed Linda running to the hospital's main computer room. "She's not running away," Rachel said. "She's trying to send out the list. All the names of the children. She's trying to warn them." Dr. Smith helped Dave up. "I didn't kill those 30 people because they knew about Project Hope," he admitted. "I made it look like I did to protect the real killer, the person who's been running everything from the beginning." "Who?" Sarah asked. But Hope and Jenny were already looking at the doorway, where a new figure stood. It was Martha, the real Martha, who they thought was tied up in the closet. But she wasn't a helpless nurse. The closet where they found her was empty, except for a white coat with a name tag. Dr. Martha Wilson, head of Project Hope. "I've been here the whole time," she said, smiling, "watching my experiments grow up. Hope, Jenny, Linda, and all the others. Hundreds of special children almost ready. And now, thanks to Linda sending out that list, they'll all know who they really are." But Martha didn't see Hope and Jenny holding hands, their eyes closed in concentration. All around the hospital, lights began to flicker. Computers turned on by themselves, and somewhere in the building, Linda was pressing send on a message that would reach every Project Hope child in the country. The truth about the 30 victims was coming out, but an even bigger story was just beginning. The story of the children who survived, who grew up not knowing what they could do, and now they were about to find out. Outside, more police cars arrived. But they weren't just carrying police officers. In each car was someone who had seen the message. We remember. The lost children of Project Hope were coming home. The hospital's front doors burst open. People started walking in, young men and women, all around the same age as Hope, Jenny, and Linda. Their phones glowed with the same message. We remember. Some looked scared, others angry. All of them wanted answers. In the computer room, Linda's hands moved fast over the keyboard. Tears rolled down her face as she saw her real name on the screen. Test subject 3, Linda Carter. Now she knew why she always felt different. Why she could do things others couldn't. Martha stood in the old operating room doorway, still smiling. But her smile faded when she saw Hope and Jenny holding hands. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking for the first time. "Showing everyone the truth," Hope said. Through their special abilities, Hope and Jenny made every computer, every phone, every screen in the hospital show the same thing. Old videos of Project Hope. Young children in hospital rooms being tested, crying for their parents. "Those aren't just videos," Jenny explained. "They're memories. Our memories. And now every Project Hope child can see them." Sarah grabbed the map with the red dots. "There aren't just hundreds of children," she said, counting quickly. "There are thousands, all around the world." Officer Tom's radio came alive with voices. "They're coming in everywhere," someone said. "Every hospital in the country. People saying they remember being part of something called Project Hope." Dr. Smith looked at Martha with sad eyes. "You told me if I helped you hide the truth about the 30 victims, you'd keep Hope safe. But you were never protecting her. You were just waiting until she was old enough to use her abilities." Martha laughed, but now she sounded scared. "You don't understand what we created," she said. "These children, they're the next step in human evolution. We had to hide them, train them secretly. The world wasn't ready." "No," said a voice behind her. Linda had come back, and with her was a crowd of Project Hope children. "You hid us because you were afraid. Afraid of what we can do. Afraid we would find each other." Suddenly, all the lights in the hospital turned bright white. Every machine turned on. Phones rang. Computers hummed. It wasn't just Hope and Jenny now. All the Project Hope children were using their abilities together. "The 30 victims," Linda said, holding up her phone. "I found the real files. They weren't just witnesses. They were our real parents. The ones who gave us up thinking we had died. The ones who later found out we were alive and tried to find us." Martha tried to run, but she couldn't move. The Project Hope children held her in place with their combined powers. Outside, more cars arrived, but these weren't police cars. They were parents, hundreds of them, coming to find their lost children. Dr. Carter opened the Project Hope file one last time. On the last page was a list of names, the original doctors who started the project. At the top was a familiar name, Dr. Martha Wilson. "My own daughter," Martha whispered, looking at Hope. "You were the first, my perfect success. I gave you up to prove that the project could work, that even a mother could give up her child for the greater good." Hope's eyes went wide. Jenny grabbed her hand tighter. The lights flickered wildly as Hope learned the truth. The woman who had created Project Hope, who had hurt so many children, was her real mother. But before anyone could react, a loud alarm started ringing. Red lights flashed everywhere. "Self-destruct sequence activated," said a robotic voice. "This facility will be destroyed in 10 minutes. Martha smiled again. If I can't have my experiments, no one can. This hospital will bury all our secrets. The Project Hope children looked at each other. They had found each other at last, but now they had to work together to save themselves. And somewhere in the building, a timer was counting down. While outside, more lost children and their searching parents were still arriving. The truth about the 30 victims had led them here. But now, an even bigger question remained. Could the children of Project Hope use their powers together to stop Martha's final plan? And what would happen when thousands of special children finally learned what they could really do? 9 minutes until self-destruct, the robotic voice announced. People started to panic, running towards the exits, but Hope raised her hands. "Stop!" she shouted. "We can save everyone!" Linda rushed to the nearest computer. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, trying to stop the countdown. "It's no use," she said. "The system is locked." Martha made sure no one could stop it. "But she didn't know what we can do together," Jenny said. She turned to the crowd of Project Hope children. All of us, working as one. That's what she was always afraid of. Sarah grabbed the Project Hope files and started passing them out. "Find your real names, your real families," she called out. "They're all outside, but first, we have to survive this." 8 minutes, the voice said. Hope looked at Martha, her real mother, with tears in her eyes. "Why? Why would you do this to your own daughter?" Martha struggled against the invisible force holding her still. "Because you were perfect," she said. "Too perfect. I knew if you ever found out the truth, you'd be strong enough to destroy everything I built. That's why the 30 victims had to die. They were getting too close to finding you all." Dr. Smith suddenly remembered something. "The basement!" he shouted. "That's where the bombs are. I saw them when Dave took me down there." 7 minutes. The Project Hope children formed a circle, holding hands. Hope, Jenny, and Linda stood in the middle. "Focus on the basement," Hope said. "See it in your minds. Feel the bombs. We can stop them together." The hospital started to shake. Lights exploded. Windows cracked. The combined power of thousands of special children made the whole building vibrate. 6 minutes. Outside, parents pressed against the police lines, calling out names they hadn't spoken in years, names of children they thought were dead. Officer Tom grabbed his radio. "Get those parents back," he shouted. "It's not safe." In the basement, the bombs started to glow. The children's power was reaching them, but something was wrong. "They're nuclear!" Dr. Carter shouted, reading from another file. "If we try to stop them the wrong way, they'll explode now." 5 minutes. Rachel and her twin ran to the basement stairs. "We can help," they said together. "We weren't just nurses. We were part of the original project team. We know how these bombs work." Joe the cleaner looked at his daughter Jenny with pride. All these years, he'd known she was special. Now he knew why. He held up the strange bottle with its scraped-off label. "The DNA samples," he said. "They're not just proof of what happened. They're the key to your powers." 4 minutes. Martha laughed weakly. "You'll never figure it out in time. My life's work will end here, and the world will never know about Project Hope." But Linda had an idea. She turned to the other children. "The bottles, they don't just have our DNA. They have the chemical formula that activated our powers. If we can find that formula in our blood now." 3 minutes. Hope squeezed Jenny's and Linda's hands harder. "Everyone!" she shouted to the Project Hope children. "Remember the tests they did on us, the medicine they gave us. Find that memory." The hospital shook harder. Papers flew everywhere. In the basement, the bombs started to change color. 2 minutes. Suddenly, all the Project Hope children gasped at once. Their eyes glowed with a strange light. They had found the memory, and with it, the key to controlling their powers completely. 1 minute. Martha's smile disappeared as she realized what was happening. The children weren't just stopping the bombs. They were changing them, using the same science that had changed them so many years ago. 30 seconds. The basement filled with bright light. The bombs floated in the air, surrounded by the combined power of thousands of special children. But would they stop in time? 10 seconds? 9? 8? Hope looked at her mother one last time. Project Hope isn't ending, she said. It's just beginning. But this time, we're in control. 3, 2, 1. The countdown hit 0. Everyone held their breath. But instead of an explosion, every light in the hospital turned bright gold. The bombs in the basement dissolved into harmless dust. The Project Hope children had done it. Together, they had changed the very structure of the bombs, just like Project Hope had changed them. Martha fell to her knees, crying. "It's impossible," she whispered. "The power, it was never meant to be this strong." Hope walked to her mother, still holding Jenny and Linda's hands. "You wanted to create special children," she said, "but you forgot something important. Children grow up, we learn, we got stronger, and now we're not your experiments anymore." Outside, the police lines broke. Parents rushed into the hospital, calling out names. One by one, the Project Hope children found their real families. There were tears, hugs, and so many questions. Linda found her real parents. They were doctors from another city who had never stopped searching for her. Jenny hugged Joe tightly, thanking him for being her real father, no matter what the DNA said. Rachel and her twin helped Officer Tom arrest Martha. "The 30 victims," Rachel explained, "they died trying to bring families back together. Now we can finish what they started." Dr. Smith looked at Hope, his daughter, but not by blood. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought I was protecting you. I didn't know Martha was—" "My real father," Hope said, touching his arm, "is the one who raised me, who tried to save others even when he was forced to look guilty. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does." Sarah opened the last file from Project Hope. Inside was a list of other secret labs around the world, where more children might be hidden. "This isn't over," she said. "There's more work to do." Dr. Carter started making calls to other hospitals. The story was spreading fast. Thousands of special children, separated families finally reunited, and the truth about the 30 victims who died trying to make it happen. But in the confusion, no one noticed Dave was gone. He had slipped away during the chaos, taking some of the DNA samples with him. Somewhere out there, he would try to start Project Hope again. But this time, the children would be ready. 1 month later, the old city hospital was changed into something new, the Hope Center. It became a place where the Project Hope children could come together, learn about their abilities, and help find others like them. The 30 victims were honored with a memorial wall. Their sacrifice finally understood. Linda, Jenny, and Hope stood in front of the building on opening day. Above the door was a new sign. "The truth cannot be buried. It grows, and in time, it blooms." "What do we do now?" Linda asked, watching more families arrive. Some looking for answers, others offering help. Hope smiled, looking at the crowd. Some were Project Hope children, now grown up. Others were parents still searching. There were doctors who wanted to help, and officers like Tom who wanted to protect them. "Now," Hope said, "we do what the 30 victims tried to do. We bring families back together. We help others like us, and we make sure nothing like Project Hope ever happens again." Jenny pointed to the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering. "There are more labs out there, more children who don't know what they are." "Then we'll find them," Hope said firmly. "All of them. Because that's what families do." As they walked into their new home, Hope thought about Martha. sitting in her prison cell. She had wanted to create something powerful, something that would change the world. And she had, just not in the way she planned. Because the real legacy of Project Hope wasn't the powers they had. It was what they chose to do with them. And that story was just beginning. In hospitals across the world, computers blinked with the same message: "We remember, we're coming, you're not alone." The 30 victims could rest now. Their sacrifice had led to something greater than anyone could have imagined. Not just the truth about one killer, but the reuniting of thousands of families and the birth of a new kind of hope. Above the city, the storm clouds parted, letting in rays of sunlight. A new day was dawning, and somewhere out there, another lost child was about to remember who they really were.